Thank you everyone for staying with us. Let's put our two discussions this morning on the road. I've been joined by two gentlemen, starting from my immediate left is Felix Osarime, is a lecturer at the Department of International Studies and Diplomacy at the University of Benin. Thank you, Felix, for coming. We appreciate it.
Good morning. Viewers at home, good morning. Welcome to the show.
And next to him is the only cowboy in our midst this morning, even though in practice it's not a cowboy. He's an economist and a politician, Honorable Fred Uyigwe. Thank you as well for coming to spend some time with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right,
good morning to you, viewers.
Let me start with you, Fred. You and I have talked about the Electoral Act here quite a number of times. And as it stands today, we understand that the Senate has given go-ahead to INEC to say, look, you can conduct elections and then transmit results electronically. Many Nigerians have argued that, look, this is long overdue and is the way to go. But is that far-reaching enough as far as reforms are concerned within electoral space?
Well, it's an improvement, and we should be thankful that for a change, and against all odds and against all expectations,
right,
that we are now beginning to see the legislators, I mean, coming around to reason. Because, like you have just said, it's been long overdue. Internet connectivity cannot be said at this point in time in Nigeria to be a challenge anywhere across the country. We are able to make phone calls to people all around the country. We are able to send messages on WhatsApp to people around the country, showing that there's internet connectivity on both sides. And we're able to transmit funds or transfer funds.
Right.
So all these are processes that rely heavily on internet connectivity. So for anybody to have challenged it, as it were, was not acceptable, was not in good faith. But now that they are coming around, yes, we are glad. But to answer your question,
yes,
is it far-reaching enough? There are some other elements that make for credible elections, okay? And those are the elements that we also must consider along with this particular measure that we are all supporting, which is electronic transmission of results. We must talk of transparency. The electronic transmission of results goes a long way to buttress and give credibility to transparency in the process.
Yes.
Okay. But we also must consider ballot access. Ballot access is key. Ballot access is that mechanism that allows those who are qualified to contest elections to be able to do so without extraneous hindrances. Like we know the expression of interest fees and the nomination fees are bogus and expensive, out of the reach of the ordinary man. If we want our qualified specialists and professionals to partake in the process, like your lecturer here, I don't believe will be willing to gamble 20 million naira.
You've not seen his bank account balances, have you?
I don't just believe that he might have a robust bank account, but he might not be willing to gamble it. Those who are usually willing to do so are those who have had the opportunity to put their hand in the till, loot the treasury, and having not worked for it, are free to gamble away or feel unhindered to gamble away what they looted, in the hopes that they will be able to have an access to loot some more. What we must stem, it's a system that now throws up those who are not qualified, but become qualified because they have deep pockets. we want to bring a better, a more level playing field to the process.
Okay.
And the only way to do that is to have a reasonable ballot access mechanism. Like I believe I mentioned in one of the previous programs, to be able to contest the United States presidential election, for example, the president only needs to apply with $500, which is meager. Okay, that is a week's pay for some of the lowest paid workers in the US.
Yes.
Even for
the ones without college degree,
janitor, and even for a janitor can in 2 weeks afford that. You know, so the ballot access is very important. That amount, what is now required by the political parties, must have to come down. We must say that in now embracing electronic transmission of results, the political parties are going to have to key into it in their own conduct of their internal elections.
Okay.
So that the whole process
can be seamless.
Yes, it becomes more transparent, starting from
the ground up.
Ground up, starting from the political parties down to general elections.
Right. I'm going to let you catch your breath quickly, but let me talk to Felix about card reader, which also had become controversial, particularly in 2015. On the one hand, you have those who say, look, this card reader as an item, as an element, it's not backed by law. But of more relevance to this conversation is the fact that we had seen several glitches associated with the card reader. Several persons had not been able to vote in 2015 and in 2019 because of the card reader problem. We saw how former President Goodluck Jonathan almost couldn't vote as well. Same thing for his wife. All right. So we've seen all of those. Incident forms being dispersed across the country, and that again tainted the process as far as those elections in 2015 and 2019 were concerned. In this case, however, ultimately and hopefully, this transmission of results by electronic means will be backed by law. Are we not still going to come back to that square one? Some people say square zero, where we begin to talk about challenges that are associated with the process. The NCC has said, look, only barely 50% of Nigerians, of Nigeria as a country is covered by 3G. Some persons still argue, especially those within the tech space, that in practice, we actually don't have 4G in Nigeria. I know you are not a tech expert, but we're just trying to be a bit proactive with some of these problems that are already ahead.
We should be a bit circumspect here. I'm using the word circumspect because we tend to chase the shadow and leave the substance. NCC will shoot itself in the foot if it argues that they've not covered enough space.
Okay. Because
we do know that in Nigeria, yes, coverage is, if our rollout plans are still being carried out by the telecommunications
the operators.
Yes. And before the opprobrium that came up, actually early last year, when we started having challenges with the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, some persons said, oh, it was an attempt to launch even 5G. Not 4G. Some phones, if you activate some phones, your phone will show you 4G. 4G network has been deployed.
Or LTE.
Yes, we are not arguing that point. You see, this is where we've missed the argument. It is not that is a problem. It is the use that we have put technology to in Nigeria today that is our problem. So the technology, we did not invent the internet, we did not invent the mobile communication system, we acquired all these things. It will be self-defeating that in 2021, Nigerians are arguing that we don't have enough coverage. Meanwhile, the same Nigerian will sit in his living room, in the comforts of his bedroom, can do Snapchat, WhatsApp, Instagram with someone that is at the other end of the world.
Uploading millions of videos on YouTube every day.
That is essentially is where we end up embarrassing ourselves unduly. So it is not the technology. That is not the problem. If you look at the clause that the senators repeat, or the one they are amending now, that's the clause 52,
yes,
which has to do with electronic transmission. The original point they made in July was that electronic transmission of results will be acceptable only when it is approved by NCC.
Some people say that was an aberration.
Yes, which would have made INEC is no longer independent. They said when it's approved by NCC and the National Assembly, then they use a term that when and where applicable.
What's the implication of that?
Implication of that is that they are actually telling that in some cases it will be subject to contestation to say, oh, maybe the base station was not working or what you transmitted was not clear, because they also put a caveat that it is only when such things are secure. You see, these are all issues. It is therefore as if the National Assembly, as at the time it was constructing that legislation, was already putting in place bottlenecks. That is not going to help this country. Let us look at what would have been pragmatic. The pragmatic thing here is this. If I send you a text message, and you know my number is tied to my identity already,
of course.
So it already creates some level of authentication. There are protocols for authentication of identity transmitted from one end to another. Obviously. There are base stations that also carry that information. It is therefore risky for any party agent who sends a result that will be seen at the other end to send a wrong result, because he is tying himself to that same information he has transmitted. Right. And good enough, NCC has also deployed the rollout plan that all Nigerians should go and register their SIM card, do biometrics. Is that not so? That means by the time I fingerprint myself and my phone number is tied to my identity,
so NIN and the rest.
And NIN is also linked to it. It means I am bound by regulation to be sure of what I'm transmitting. It also means that if it can be traced back to me, I'm already under oath, technically, that I will do what is proper. And let me go back to my course. This is the integrity we are talking of. Accountability, transparency gives integrity. So if you are a party agent, you want to send a result of a police station, you have to be very sure that what you are sending is what exactly happened there. If the INEC officials, the ad hoc staff, both the polling clerk, the presiding officer, the supervisory presiding officer, if they are going to allow you to send that result, they are also going to be sure that what you are sending is similar to what they are sending. People can also use the social media outlet, not just text message, WhatsApp or Instagram. As the election is going on, they can be doing videos and be sure that the number of persons that are created to vote reconcile with the result that you are going to send. If you are created 20 persons and your result now saying that you have 50 votes, where did the 30 extras come from? So let us now bring it back to the card reader. The card reader is also a device. And the card reader, as I've seen it, where I've also interacted with it, you put a SIM card in the card reader for it to work. If you put an unregistered SIM card in the card reader, it will not sign in on the network. Apparently. That was why most people were complaining last time. They didn't know that most of the SIM cards that were in the card reader were not signed to the network. It's also there that if you put a SIM card that is signed in and there is no airtime, how will it connect to the network? All these are bottlenecks. We should be sure that before you go to the election field, test run all this your equipment. It is here you find that on the day of the election, that's when they are told that the thing did not sign it because the SIM card inside has not been registered.
Or you don't have data on it.
Or you don't have data or airtime. Because actually, as at the side of that card reader, it was airtime, not data.
Not data.
Because it wasn't to transmit videos and pictures, it was to transmit information, which should have been in form of text message. That's why I've seen that. And the data part was to come in later, which would have made sure that on both sides, you are effectively covered. So you should have data, you should have airtime. Either way, this card data, therefore, will be able to function effectively. Once it is deficient, it has failed in its primary expectation to make sure that the identity of the person to vote will be properly captured because there's already a database. Unfortunately, the law did not back it up. Meanwhile, it was a tested process. Now, for the former president to go and vote and could not immediately cast his vote would have already created suspicion about that process. We have gone beyond 2015. We are in 2021. So whatever mistake was made 6 years ago should not be another excuse in this present
I want to follow you up with a question before I talk to Fred here. How much more work does this put in front of INEC? I mean, this electronic transmission.
I just answered the question. If that mistake was made in 2015, when Goodluck Jonathan...
With the card reader?
Yes, with the card reader. Should we be using that same excuse in 2021? The answer is no. INEC has been working. INEC has also conducted another presidential election in 2019. So between 2015 and 2019, one would expect a viable commission to sit up and look at what were the failings of the immediate past election.
But then again, some people say the fact that INEC has been clamoring and continues to insist that electronic transmission of results is feasible is a clear sign that they are ready for this curve.
Well, we are Nigerians. saying and doing are two different things. We should not always play to the gallery, the public gallery. I just said something now before you raise this question, that it is not to say it, it is to find that it is actionable. INEC will say they are ready to transmit results. The same INEC today that they don't have a server. Is that not confusing? So INEC should not be playing to the gallery. INEC should be defending its integrity by saying, if you want us to prove this thing, let us test it for you. We don't need to wait for election. That's the point I made just now. When you come to election day and there's a failure, it would have made that process now seem intractable and it will lose transparency. Instead, before you conduct a major election, for example, in an off-season election, just like the type we had in Edo State, you can use it as a test run. It's not a national election.
Like a pilot case.
You can use it as a test case and say, okay, we are going to conduct a by-election in Ikorodu local government. We will use it as an example. We are going to conduct a by-election in Anambra State. We use it as an example. We did a by-election in Edo State. This was our result. This is our test case. This is the place we got to. These are where the areas we had challenges, and we have subsequently addressed this challenge. Draw a checklist.
And it was successful when it was done in Edo State.
It was. And people applauded the process.
So the question
people
is, why do we avoid it then?
Because there are issues that Nigerians decide to run away from. That's why I started by saying we leave the substance and we chase shadows.
I'll let you hold your thoughts for a minute. Let me talk to Fred now. There are those who are now saying, look, we are likely going to have a repeat of 2019 where the president withheld assent to the
when the president will do what?
When he withheld assent.
Okay,
that was in 2019, and the reason was it was too close to the election, that it should be sometime after the election. Of course, it's been more than 2 years down the line now. Some persons are expressing the fear that the president could withhold assent again this time. What will be the ramification of such an action?
That would be so ridiculous, especially since it's the same president.
Okay.
Who withheld assent before the previous election, which would have been like 4 years prior. So that system will be telling us that they were not able to consider the problem in 4 years. That's the facts about it. Okay. The thing is, I don't believe the president would put himself in such a predicament, and I don't believe that the House of the National Assembly will also place themselves in such a predicament, because they have presented that bill once before. If anything, they will need to modify that particular bill, to be able to capture improvements and improvement and advancement in technology and represent it. Like you're saying, we are just about halfway into the term of President Buhari's second term in office. So we have plenty of time now to present it. Or let me say the National Assembly has plenty of time to represent that bill, or modified bill. And the president also has plenty of time to consider it and for it to go back and forth for whatever amendments that, or whatever compromise that needs to be done for that bill to go through. So I don't believe that it's going to be a problem. I will be shocked if that becomes a problem, if we have a repeat of that excuse. The fact that the National Assembly has now embraced it shows that they are beginning to come to reason. They are beginning to agree with most Nigerians, who are already sufficiently informed, who are already sufficiently convinced that electronic transmission of results is the way to go, because we daily rely on internet connectivity, because we use it, and we know that we are not having the kind of challenges that the National Assembly is telling us that they foresee in because internet connectivity is not selective.
Right.
You know, internet connectivity is not going to discriminate between electoral transmission of results and transfer of funds and
every other
activity. So it was not a very smart excuse.
Okay. So you're hoping that changes. But let's look at going forward how these changes the narrative in light of the 2023 general election, because this will be the first time, hopefully, that will be test running, as it were, this means of transmission of results, which is the electronic option. How do you see that playing out in 2023?
I see the INEC chairman wanting to leave a legacy for himself. Okay, like Jega did with the card reader.
Right.
The card reader was a monumental improvement over the ballot papers and all of that.
The manual process.
The manual process. And this electronic transmission of results too will be a major milestone over that.
Okay.
And that is why the chairman has insisted that he is able to do that and will go ahead to do that anyway. That is transmit results electronically.
Yeah.
And like our friend here has said, this process has been tested. It's not a question of wanting to now test it, but the process has already been tested in some local elections, like the Edo State governorship election. It was tested and it worked beautifully well. I believe it was tested in a couple of other places. And Anambra, it's another one that is
in front of us.
It's in front of us. And where the INEC chairman has said he plans to use that system there. So we are going to be hopeful. We are going to be watching the Anambra governorship election very closely to see what comes of it. But to debunk the arguments of those who kicked against it in the past and who still have reservations about the effectiveness of electronic transmitted results and or the possibility or potential of that, their arguments were without evidence. It is not sufficient to, anybody can make any bogus claim. You can stand on a podium and you make claims and all of that, but you have to support it with reasons. Acceptable reasons, and where possible, evidence. Okay. What I thought about is that for those who were against it, they needed to have provided locations, specific locations across the country where they felt or where they knew that internet connectivity was a challenge.
Yeah.
And then that could have been verified by INEC and by independent sources, like the mass media.
Right.
Mass media could have gone to such places to authenticate those claims. If it is established that those claims are bogus, then the arguments becomes invalid, baseless. And then we can now come back to the table. And we have to be grateful to God that there's plenty of time, to be able to ascertain all of that
address these issues.
now. Plenty of time before the next general elections. So let me not be too optimistic.
Okay.
But I don't believe...
to keep your hopes moderate?
Yes, I want to keep my hopes moderate. But I don't believe the transmission of results electronically is going to be too much of a challenge.
Okay, great, gentlemen. Let's make the most of the very limited time that we have, just the next few minutes, to talk about something else, because it will appear, Felix, that the National Assembly has made a name for itself this week, because the second issue they talked about was how that going forward, political parties should adopt the direct mode of primaries. Of course, we have seen politicians, A-listers within the political space, including minority leader of the Senate, Senator Eyinaya Baribe, saying that this will pose a challenge for some parties. The parties should adopt whichever method works for them, given their own internal peculiarities between direct and indirect modes of primaries. What have been your thoughts since you saw that piece of news?
It's a bit. It's ordinarily at face value. It's a good idea.
Face value.
Face value, yes. Prima facie, it's a good idea, in the sense that you'll be making it possible for only very popular candidates, in quote, very popular, acceptable, that can convince all units, wards in the political space to become a candidate. You see, the mentality of the average politician is that if you can spend money, you can get what you want.
No matter how unpopular you may be.
And the money bag factor can be reduced essentially by the use of direct primaries. How? Direct primaries means being able to convince every person. This one is not the ESCO. It is not the leaders. It is every member of the party. So it will mean, therefore, that you will have to actually deploy huge resources at the level of the party to carry out such congress, where members will now individually come out and tell you, this is the person we want to represent us. That means the person must have also gone around. Now, the difficulty here, as the minority leader in the Senate has argued, and the opposition party is also holding on to it, that it will cost political parties too much. That's their grounds. But the point is, what is a direct primary? That's what we should first of all be looking at. And in the direct primary, you are talking of members of a political party coming out to choose who is going to be their candidate for any elective office.
Not restricted to,
it is
to a group.
The other one is the indirect primary. In indirect primaries, what you have is that the ESCO and the leaders of the party will become delegates who will now gather and choose a candidate on behalf of the party.
That has been the practice for the most times in 1999.
In many political parties, they have the option of direct or indirect. That has been the existing legislation too. What was done in clause 87 is to say, henceforward, use one.
Okay.
That is the argument PDP and some parties are holding on to. That it will no longer be democratic. People should be allowed the element of choice. Parties should be given the free hand to choose whether to go direct or to use indirect method to achieve the same objective. But we also know that most of the time it is they also added a caveat that INEC must witness and certify.
Is that cumbersome?
That has
always been there. But in many instances, you find that there will be two primaries in one day. Some people tell you that delegates were hosted somewhere, they have been hijacked, or they've been bought
by
over
certain interests.
By certain interests. The INEC will be somewhere else. You will not be wondering what is, if that has been the biggest problem that most of the political parties have had. That is why at times you hear that there was primaries in one location, there was another primary. INEC could not be at sea which one to validate.
So we go to court.
And when they go to court, the court will now decide who becomes a candidate, thereby depriving the people most times of the ability to choose. And it is not good. Whether we like it or not, we should not allow democracy to be such that only the courts now decide who is the candidate. That is wrong.
Great.
Let people make their choice.
Without having to escalate to the courts. Let me just give you 2 minutes now, Fred, so you can react to this as we wrap up finally on the program this morning. What exactly must we do to fix the internal mechanism of political parties in Nigeria? Because they say that is the engine room. That's where you throw leaders off from. So if we don't get it right at that point, which some persons have called the base, we are going to always have problems at the stage. So how do we fix it from, that bottom-up approach?
The political parties have their constitutions to go by.
Of course.
Okay. And I want to jump in on this idea of direct primaries as against indirect primaries. The indirect primaries was fraught with wheeling and dealing. Okay, by money bags politicians, those who could afford it, and those who were less able to afford it had to step back and align with those who could afford it. But the case of direct primaries eliminates that. The direct primaries is more reflective, as is a general election, as our general elections, or are more reflective of the people's wish,
right,
than an indirect election that has to be conducted by representatives. Okay, so I am for direct primaries, for example. The Constitution is the guiding principle or document that guides the functions of the party and all of that. And I believe we have had a sufficiently credible judicial process in resolving intra-party conflicts. So where there have been misinterpretations or differences in interpretation of their constitution or of their laws within the party, the courts have stepped up to be able to do that. Yeah. So I am confident that it's working well. But that is not to say that there's no room for improvement.
Right.
One of the things I mentioned earlier, it's the ballot access. That is still a very big problem because people who are qualified are not yet able to access ballot. That is the opportunity to represent their constituencies. Yeah. Okay, and that needs to be faced. And I don't see the political parties doing that on their own. It might have to come in way of legislation too, but it first has to be championed by those who see it as a problem. Yeah. For one, I see it as a problem, and I believe many Nigerians, of course, most Nigerians, I will say, very confidently, see it as a problem that our best and brightest do not have access to political representation. Okay, for the people or for the opportunity to represent their people.
That has adverse impacts on quality of governance.
Exactly, because if you don't have your best and your brightest, it means you are going to settle for mediocrity. And that is where we are. And we are suffering very heavily under it.
Okay, let's hope that suffering ends in good enough time. Gentlemen, thank you for coming to join us on the program this morning. Fred Uyigwe, thank you. And Felix Osarime, we appreciate you as well for beating up the odds to be here on the program this morning. We'll take a quick break, a handful of interviews up ahead, and then we're done with the program this morning. Don't go away.